Here we go. So I'm going to @channel. We are live on DBR Live. 2,149 people in 18 different time zones today on DBR. And I have with me Sam Cameron, as always, and the one and only Hung Lee. So Hung, welcome to the show.
Absolutely, my pleasure, guys. I've been watching this for a little while, so I've been very excited to see the content, and an honor for me to take part in it. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Dude, it's an honor to have you here.
Yeah, it is an honor, for sure.
And Sam, how are you, man? Happy Thursday, right?
Yeah, happy Thursday. I think it's feeling more like a Tuesday for me, but you can't complain, right? That's the whole thing.
Yeah, you can't complain, definitely. I like, as we were talking at the beginning of the show and we were setting it up, I thought we were talking about when we first met Hung. So I was going to ask you that, Sam, before Hung, I get you to talk. I'm going to ask Sam this. So Sam, do you remember the first time you met Hung Lee?
Like it was yesterday.
I'm now a bit alarmed as to what's going to come out of Sam's mouth now, but
no, I'm not going to overly romanticize it. But it was back in 2016 or so. I remember I was working at a company called DataSift, and it was I think it was in summer or so, but I remember connecting with Hung, and Hung, he obviously had Workshake back then and was selling the product and etc. And he was like, hey, you know what? There's a pretty cool group you should check out at the time, which was 10 people or so, called DBR, funny enough. And this was like the first time that I had contact with Hung, and ended up being a guy I stay in touch with over a super long time, whilst I did my own little startup thing as well. And I think I only have good things to say about Hung, like many people. But what about you? When did you meet him, Tris?
So the first time I ever spoke to Hung, I called him and BD'd him when he was at Peer Index and I was at Revill. And he was, it was cool. We were talking about startups and stuff. I remember that was a cool conversation. And then I actually met him first time face to face at Talent Hackers. Talent Hackers 1, I think. And then when I did the live at Talent Hackers 2 as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty honored. I have to say, Hung, you have been a huge inspiration for me in my career, and someone that I really look up to. And I'm really honored to have you on the show. So, do you remember any of those events, Hung?
You know what? No, guys, you're so insignificant in my life. No, I beg your pardon. I do remember them very well, actually. I don't quite remember the call you put in, because obviously, as an internal guy at the time, you get bombarded by lots. But I do remember the event that Workable, I think, put together with a bunch of other companies, and it was actually that sort of that was the kernel of DBR, really, because I recall that there was lots of people in the room that were learning stuff, but there was also a segment of the population where the content that was shared didn't really speak to that group. And we thought, you know what, there's probably a small group of people that really do need to share a little bit more advanced stuff, because, you know, we're kind of duplicating working in these, you know, working in our own companies. And I think the first conversations we had, and this is just like a back of the room. I mean, it's a pretty random chance that we might have been just standing around together looking at this. But I think it was all about the realization that recruitment can actually be quite a lonely job. Because especially in startup, because you might be the one person in 50, everyone else is in a team, everyone else has a stand-up, everyone else is doing all these collaborative type of work, and there you are trying to find software developers, right? And we thought, you know what? We need to actually create some sort of support network here, and why don't we just connect the dots with other recruiters in these rapid growth companies, because probably they feel the same. And that's where I think the kernel of DBR started right there and then, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and from my memory, I think you just sent us all an email being like, hey, come for a drink. And we didn't even really know what was going to happen. It was just like, you're just inviting some people for a drink, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was literally a case of whoever we had that sort of early thought that perhaps, you know, the people felt the same. Let's just get together. I think we had such a low bar as to what we wanted to achieve. You know, we just said, at the very least, we'll just get a bunch of people together and have a few drinks and you know, share some horror stories. You know, and that in itself might be good therapy for us. But of course, since that time, and much credit to the admin guys that have put it together, including you two, it's been pushed on into this superb community, which I think everyone who's been part of it can certainly say it's just it'll give you 10-20% extra performance simply by being in that group. So yeah, I'm very, very impressed to see where it's where that sort of where it's now sort of gone to from those humble beginnings,
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think I realized a good point here, yeah, that maybe some people are tuning in for like the first time or so if they don't know what like DBR is. Pretty simply, it's, I think, actually probably one of the largest groups in the world, right? When you think about it, for in-house recruiters. So we're about 2,500 members or so now, free to join. Just soak up all the knowledge, like very simply. And I know you had linked it in LinkedIn and etc. as well. But it's super great to have you here, and I think we had some pretty interesting questions lined up for you. I hope you're ready as well.
I'm ready, born ready with this. So fire away. Ask me anything. So I'm an open book to you two.
Yeah, and if you're watching on the stream, like we're watching the comments on YouTube and on the Slack channel. So like hit the like button, hit the share button, ask a question. We'll ask it. We'll give you a shout out on the show as well. And Sam, I'll let you talk for jumping in there, but just to do my growth hacking thing, right? Like Sam, you want to go for it? You got some great questions lined up already.
Yeah. So we're not going to dive into the special section of questions just yet that we've got prepared, but I think it's been pretty widely known, especially with the curation of your newsletter BrainFood, that you're a guy who's very I say woke in the recruitment industry, has a good idea of what's going on, both attending conferences, being in touch with people in-house, and really wanted to understand what's your thoughts on the current state of recruiting right now.
Okay, current state of recruiting, obviously very big topic. One of the things I would say is that we often have a universal kind of understanding of recruiting as a big R, and we consider everything to be the same. One of the things I've learned by going to different countries, different conferences, and speaking to different people is actually that experience is very different compared to the industry you're in, or the country you're in, or even the city you're in. So I think the broad stroke, that's the first thing I've learned from trying to do all of this, is that actually local conditions are very different. And I suspect a lot of the tension you sometimes see in the recruiting community, where there's online debates happening and people getting very passionate about it, is because we fail to understand that actually this person recruiting blue collar work in Rotterdam, for instance, has a very different experience from someone in New York recruiting ad tech sales. Even though they're still recruiting, you're going to need different tools, different techniques, different behaviors to succeed in that. So I hope that we'll get a little bit of a better understanding of recruiting as being much more complex, based on industry and based on geography than perhaps we otherwise would say the case. But to address your question, I think recruitment is, from my world, which is what I know most, which is basically metropolitan, white collar based, digital stroke technology based folks. I think recruitment is, moving probably quite significantly away from sourcing data, so to speak, as the primary problem, to more thinking about how do we connect and engage with these high demand people, high demand, highly skilled people. Data, I think, of course, you need to identify who they are, and of course, you need to find the people. But the current and I think the future problem is going to be, how do you kind of get them to listen to your voice? And that's something where we're seeing technology solutions, we're seeing greater techniques, better techniques from recruiters. We're seeing more inbound marketing style stuff, for something I'm very passionate about, where instead of going out to the internet and scraping 100 million CVs, you're thinking about, how can I create some sort of asset in the internet to get people to actually come to me rather than go out to them, because that can transform the challenges of engagement. So I think there's that slow movement in the world that us three probably most inhabit, I'd say.
Interesting. And I like the fact that you said that it's so different in the different places, because you really have kind of traveled everywhere this year, right? You talked about every single conference, like, or like all the good ones anyway, because they had you there.
Yeah, you know what? It's never been part of the plan, but people, I guess, basically, mainly through the newsletter, has reached a lot of people, and people invite you to go, and for me, I just thought, you know what, having gone to one international conference earlier this year, it was in New York. I just realized, you know what, wow, that really taught me a lot. Very, very refreshing to speak to people in different part of the world. I think psychologically very good as well, and literally just trying to escape a little bit from any kind of bubble that you've got. And it's a huge learning. How do people actually deal with these problems? Lots of commonalities, don't get me wrong. Lots of similar problem sets that people have. But yeah, there's always local conditions that you just did not expect. That is actually the decisive thing for that locale or that industry.
Interesting. What's the most surprising thing that you kind of noticed or observed on your travels this year?
Yeah, I mean, probably the most surprising thing is that certain countries essentially have a little bit of legislature which will completely transform the entire recruitment industry in that place. So, for instance, I went to Dubai, and I assumed, Dubai from the outside in, it looks like expat centric. Of course, you can just sponsor a visa and do all of this stuff to recruit people. Amazing. But then when we went with the working in-house for these Dubai-based businesses, trying to set up technology departments and so on, their pressing concern was this emeritization policy in the country, which basically said that you needed to have a certain percentage of your employee population as a national of the United Arab Emirates. So they had a totally different, yes, they have problems recruiting developers, and yes, they can, they need to do the importing of these people, but actually the hardest thing they could do was to identify the right emerites, I think they call, to work in these high-tech, high-skilled jobs. And that was the predominant challenge. And I walked in there not understanding that in a single moment until I had even a talk prepared, talking about how you do international sourcing, because I had presumed that, yeah, of course, it's a small country, it's a city-state, they're going to want to bring other people in from the outside, not the major issue. Turns out a lot of people do want to work in Dubai, tax-free, nice weather, etc. So they don't have the attraction problem for expats. They have the problem recruiting local indigenous labor. Didn't know that until I turned up and spoke to the people there.
Wow.
I don't know if is it me or is like the stream dropping a bit here? I lost that last bit.
No, I got it.
You got it? Okay, it's just me. Good. Sorry, Sam, talk. I don't know what exactly.
So I guess you wish you had done a talk on trying to foster talent and how you can get these people into the workforce rather than like searching for them outside or so afterwards.
Yes and no. I mean, it was great to exchange the information for them, but it does remind me that whenever you go to different places in the world, there's bits of local knowledge that you don't have. Maybe you should have if you've done better research on it. But ultimately, these are external factors. Maybe they're not the normal factors, but they'll then transform your job as a recruiter. And again, you talk about the universal challenges we have, but then you map that against the local conditions, and you've got a different set of challenges.
True. So
sorry, I'm just getting loads of questions coming in, including about the pink poop. That was the pink poop.
I noticed you waving something pink, and I didn't want to comment actually.
Kind of lighten it up a bit. Come on, like you're talking about these scary challenges and all this data stuff, and like how the world is.
Pink poo to change it up in terms of tone. I agree, Chris.
I think right. And I think I've noticed this as well. Like the data thing is the thing that changes, right? The way people like behave with their own data as they move around the world and how they approach that is what changes everything in recruitment.
What do you mean exactly by that?
So Germans put less data on the internet, so it's less easy to find them on the internet. That's a thing about how they've been brought up with data. Americans are quite open with it, so they're easier to find on the internet. When you go to Tokyo, they're very protective of their career data, and they feel it like and they don't want to share it with platforms like LinkedIn. And so because of that, like, it's hard to find them on LinkedIn. And in fact, they're not even there. They're not using it. They're using Facebook and Indeed to hire. And to me, like, so that the personal approach of like, so where do I go look for a job, which changes the way that recruiters on the other end work.
Yeah, I mean, definitely just keeping going with this localization theme. Definitely there's certain territories out there that have their own kind of ecosystem, their preferred systems that they use. And that can make, you know, for an international recruiter, almost insuperable challenges sometimes. You know, Germany, I've been there loads of times. Of course, Sam, you're based in Germany, you know all of this. But they do behave very differently. And in terms of their data, you notice, for instance, I had a joke with a German friend of mine yesterday. Actually, I was in Germany, and I mentioned to her essentially, yeah, basically the Germans always have fake names on Facebook, and I'm friends with a bunch of Germans, and at least 50% of them are not called what they would be called on LinkedIn. Now that's a very unique. The Dutch don't do that. You know, it's in their very physically very close sort of population, but the Germans have a different attitude to data privacy. And maybe this comes from, you know, the experience of the Cold War, for instance. You know, the suspicion of, you know, where this data is going. Maybe even goes a little bit further back than that. But yeah, local conditions, local behaviors that you need to then tailor your game. Yeah.
Exactly, and we have Anna on the screen on the stream watching the other side, who completely pointed that out. Like, there is a, you know, Germans don't have a good track record with lists and putting the data out there, right, and stuff. So, like, I mean, you know, let's be honest, that's why the cultural difference is there. And obviously what that means then is that it changes the way you can recruit there. I think that's really interesting. Anna's asked me a question, actually. So she asked me, well, she's also asking me about the pink thing in the background. Let's see. Told you the pink thing is going to be like, it's going to be
the dominant
get
topic.
all the retweets. Anna asked me, so what do you see as the most important skill a recruiter needs to master to still be relevant in the market in the next few years?
This is a question for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So hi, Anna. The most relevant skill, I think it's a multidisciplinary job. So I'm not going to lock it down and say, oh, you need to be a hacker, or you need to be a coder, you need to do all that. The truth is, recruitment is the sort of job that's always going to require more than one skill. And one of the things that I've noticed with the sourcing movement basically emerged out of recruitment probably last 10, 15 years or so, where it became a very distinct discipline, where it was focused more on data extraction, and the skills that were prioritized in the sourcing discipline were a lot more analytical, a lot more investigative than a traditional recruiter might use. I would argue that that bifurcation, if you don't mind me using that long word, the bifurcation of the industry from into recruiter and sourcer, which is still being something that we need to kind of describe accurately in that way. But I think it'll bend back because sources, I don't think, can continue to trade simply as data extractors. That's the sort of skill set that's going to be most likely to be disintermediated by another long word. Sorry, most likely to be threatened by technology. Because if you think about sourcing, what it's really dependent upon, it's dependent on the fact that the system that you're sourcing from is inefficient in producing the returns of your search. That's why you need deep skills, right? If Google worked as you imagined it would, you would not require sourcing, right? You just type in.
Great, by the way. Can I just say Google's incredible?
Well, if you know how to use the advanced operators, then yeah. But 99.9% of the people don't know how to do that. They would look at the input box and say, "Oh, Java developer, Berlin, available now." Now, if Google worked properly as it should do, it would just deliver the candidate to you. It doesn't, so you have to use a site command, and you have to think about how this person constructs data, and this is where you get the deep skills, right? But if you look at where the future of discovery is going, it's becoming more and more automated and less human in every aspect of discovery. And I think the systems are getting better, more efficient at delivering those results to you. So I would argue that, of course, sourcing continues to have a future, but the glory days, I would say, might be coming to a close. And we, as kind of an industry, need to also be aware of what are the other skills that we need to do in order to keep active and keep marketable. So in answer to Anna's question, there is one thing I would say a recruiter needs, or a sourcer needs, that's adaptability. It is the ability to understand that you're in a dynamic and changing environment in terms of the job of recruiting, and you need to be able to develop new skills, and not always taking a super deep dive into one thing.
Cool.
Is Anna happy with that?
Interesting answer, and interesting that you think the sourcing's going to die. You could think the sourcing's going to die as a discipline, right?
No, I don't. I didn't say that. That I would say is that's probably an exaggeration of my position, though. So you know, in the same way that I think the high point of sourcing is probably now. In there's data out there. I think I read a stat somewhere where it said something like there's 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data on the internet right now in 2018. The numbers don't mean anything to us anymore. What is quadrillion, right? It's loads, right? And there's never been more sources out there. More people who work in recruitment that self-identify as sourcing as opposed to recruiter. I think golden eras are, that's when I start looking at it and think, you know what, that's when the big drop-off is starting to happen. It peaks and then it drops off. And I think we're kind of heading towards that now. Sourcing, for instance, gives you some competitive advantage.
I think, well, and do you know what, I think, okay, I agree with you to a certain extent. But I think that most sources, right, they're not engaged people. They're just like, they're trawling through this massive data. They don't realize that to engage, they need to engage with the right people in the right manner on the right platform. And they're not doing that. They're just trying to engage with everybody. Like, that's the most sources that I talk to. That's what they're doing. Is they're trying to get hold of everybody. And it's like, stop doing that. Just go and find the engaged people that are actually looking for a job, able to be contacted, interested in being contacted.
Yeah, this is why I think it bends back to traditional recruiting, though, because if you think the early era of when sourcing first became a known thing, like, you know, there was a movement to really separate it from recruiting, and to argue of its distinct identity. You know, I would probably cite someone like Glenn Cathy as one of the early pioneers of making that distinction. And it is a necessary distinction because a different set of skills, and actually different people might be better at doing sourcing than recruiting. And if you're building kind of a different style of team where you've got those functions separated, then you need to understand the difference because you're addressing different people to bring into the business. And I think it's been a great thing because it's opened up the discipline to a lot more different types of people. You know, recruiting is partly awful because there's too many salespeople in it, right? But part of the problem is that, you know, yeah, we've all come in talkers, which is great. But you know what? If it's the entire industry is just a homogenized skill set of these sales types, of course, it's not bad. So I think when sourcing came up, it brought in different types of people, more analytical types, individuals that would deliver value in different ways, and from people who I've learned a massive amount from. But I think going into this kind of near future we've got, and to your point, Tris, where you're looking at, look, it's not about getting all the data, it's getting the right data. Then it leads to the challenge. Okay, you then need to be an engager. You then need to not necessarily, you need to have a more complete skill set than simply data extraction. You need to be able to have the conversation, figure out when to talk to them, how to construct that message, and how, in fact, to build the relationship. Now, if those are classic recruiter skills, right? So I think the industry then bends back to what it is. Whether we end up calling it recruitment or something else is another point. But I think being multidisciplinary is something is very wise for most recruiters to understand and get a grip on.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. Sam, have you got a question?
I don't know. I just think it's interesting because I feel like with the way the conversation and what Hung is saying and what you are saying, for me, like at least what I feel is I feel there's still no, I say, mastery of the process. It still feels disconnected on a whole, if you see what I mean, in that we have people who are recruiters who maybe they can do some sourcing, maybe they're excellent sources, but then are they also, like you said, creating this engagement? But because, and in my opinion, like there are some fantastic tools out there, it's not so complete. There's not one solution, or like there's not one thing you use and it takes care of inbound marketing, takes care of outbound marketing, takes care of sourcing, it takes care of your ATS, you know what I mean? And it's so disconnected. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons it feels like this. Yeah, this is my opinion, of course.
That's okay though, Sam. Like one of the things, I think it's okay that it's imperfect.
Yeah.
Because you know, perfect world is something that is beyond our reach, I think. There's always going to be gaps in process and tooling and all the rest of it. And part of, I think, the role of the recruiter is to understand where those gaps are and fill it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think that when people say, "Oh, is the future recruitment a recruiter's finished?" No is my very clear answer, because the systems that are constantly being improved and produced are always going to be flawed. And it's going to always, I would say, always going to be cheaper for a human being, a skilled human being, to be able to fill those gaps.
But it's funny you mention about also how people are, I don't want to say using, like it's mentioning about data, but I always think about like data, and people say, oh yeah, I want to be data driven and I want to make all my decisions based on data, but they don't. It's generally usually like surface level. It's not like actually connecting the dots or understanding. So I think actually like going forward, in my opinion, would be like the one skill. Of course, the adaptability is super important, but actually interpreting what is going on and what is within the data that we have, because there's tons available, right? Like your reply rate and your conversions from your sourcing activities and your people, how they progress through the interview process and your offer accept rate. But what does it mean qualitatively and quantitatively is super important as well. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know what yours is, Tris. What's your one skill? Do you think it's sourcing? You're shaking this.
I have like the gift of the gab. Let's be honest. I can talk for fucking Britain. Like that's what I'm good at. The rest I can just figure it out. Actually, I don't mean what is my top skill? It's just it's curiosity. I go find something I'm interested in, and I go learn how to do it. Then I go find something new, and I go learn how to do that. That's actually a much better answer. I'll stick to that one next time you ask me that question. I got another question for you from Steve Jacobs, who's on the stream as well. In fact, there's loads of people dropping comments. So before we wrap up, and if you're on the stream watching, just say thanks to Mr. Buckland for dropping hello, Alex Jones as well. Thank you very much. Kish is online. Kish talks about this idea that someone told me that a sourcer can recruit, but a recruiter can't source. I think we kind of touched on that a little bit. So I think that's almost an opportunity for the recruitment industry in terms of creating more diversity. Let me ask Steve's question because it's a bit long. Okay. So Hung, you've revisited and talked at a number of HR tech events recently, and I'm sure you've had lots of demos. In my opinion, as a recruiter, we're being offered so many different types of candidate search, candidate assessment tools, etc., that it's very confusing and also frustrating to know which platform, product, HR tech, whatever you want to call it, to choose for your business. Is it possible, and how can you create your own audit within your talent function to know which is the right tool fit for your business?
So yeah, thanks. Yeah, I do get the question, and Steve is right. I think I had a chat with a VC recently, and I think he said something like there's something like 40,000 funded companies that are currently producing HR tech. So it's globally. So this is absolutely massive, and Steve is absolutely correct. There's no way you can navigate that and do due diligence on every single product, on every single part of the pipeline. And so then we're kind of dependent on referrals, we're dependent on testimonials, and probably information that isn't particularly good, because we need to control that amount of volume. So there's actually, I think this is similar to recruiting. There's a different type of crisis in the discovery process with vendors to buyer in most sort of tech circumstances. My recommendation to Steve here is simply, one of the hidden factors behind whether a tool is good or not is whether you have the internal capacity or competence to handle it. Like oftentimes, you need to have the audit internally to figure out who's using the product. Do they have the time? Do they have the interest? Do I see them? What is the degree of engagement I'm asking for this person to use this thing? That will often determine whether the product succeeds or fails. Very few products are out there. I think, Sam, you mentioned it earlier, comes in, it's a turnkey and the problem goes away. That product does not exist. So a great deal of the time is to think, okay, who is the primary user of this? Does that person have the competence or the capacity to use it in the way in which it's designed? That should really help you inform what product or service you bring in. Not easy, no solutions here. It's almost, what I would say is that this is a contextual decision, meaning that whatever you've got around you will determine what the right answer is.
Awesome.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to add on to that. So in your opinion, you think the market is saturated for these tools?
For a lot of particular areas, I think everyone has seen the opportunity. And the market is, sometimes the noise creates noise, right? So for instance, when you've got a segment of the recruitment flow where there isn't a dominant player, let's say, you can imagine this be onboarding, for instance. There's no dominant player there per se. That actually then encourages more fracturing of the market, because lots of people are rushing in to produce a potential dominant player. Before you know it, you have this, a mushroom effect of lots of stuff and gap. So I think that's probably the case for most stages of the recruiting funnel. You can see the consolidation happening in ATS, where I wouldn't try and build an ATS right now. You've got maybe a dozen, maybe 24 businesses that really do hoover up most of the market. LinkedIn, of course, are the big daddy of it all, and maybe they're the one that can come in and start knocking out some of these segments. But almost everything else, sourcing, assessment, engagement, onboarding, that's chock full of products. I think some very good products also, and it will just get busier. What companies have got to do is just figure out, look, what have I got internally before you make those decisions? Because what is actually so-called best in class in a particular class might work for this type of company in this context, but for you, that could be a different thing. And I guess most people don't necessarily go through that thought process before they press buy or whatever.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've got a couple of follow-up questions on this as well. So two people asked me basically the same question, Steve, and Steve says, thank you very much for the answer. Tell asked this question, and Steve asked like is there anything you recommend? But the Tell asks, like, if you had a blank sheet of paper, what is the one tool for first?
Blank sheet of paper, and I want one tool. Man, I can't possibly say because there's great products out there, right? I actually.
Why did you not say Workshape?
Yeah.
Sorry, can we talk about Workshape for a second?
We can absolutely.
Why have you not? I know you. I loved Workshape. It was great. What is it still working?
It's absolutely still working. But I'm not here to push stuff, right? So there's no point in this becoming an advertorial. My feeling is this: tools are tools. Is my fundamental position on it. One of the things that vendors typically get criticized for is promotion of their product as a silver bullet. And you can see a lot of people, internal recruiters, criticize vendors for doing that. I would also say that vendors, that the internal recruiters, the buying community, contribute to that dialogue sometimes because they demand the silver bullet. And so everyone simply should realize that it's all tools to try and fix a complicated problem. and likely you're going to need multiple tools in order to do that. Now, it could be, for instance, you need to go and fix a lock on your door. There's not one tool that's going to do that. You need a screwdriver, you need a hammer, you need a chisel. Guess what? What's the best screwdriver? What's the best hammer? What's the best chisel? You know what? It's probably dependent on the size of your hand. It's probably dependent on how strong you are. All these local conditions will then affect your choices. So, going back to the question, I'm not going to give you the one winning tool because I don't think it exists. It's definitely a context-driven situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I completely agree. And I've got questions flying in now on Slack, so I'm going to just move on and not talk about tools anymore. There's a couple of really good questions about. So there's a question here about employer brand. So how much of a differentiator do you see the employer brand is, and how is that, and see the employer brand and how this is shared when attracting a talent? So how important, right? I think what is the differentiator? How important is employer brand when you're trying to attract the right people?
I think it's very important, but again, there's complexity to the answer because there's a very good argument that people say, look, the companies that focus on employer brand are literally covering up some bad culture here. And I think people like Matt, for instance, is very keen to underline that point. And I would say he's probably right. The best employer brand is usually just emergent from great company culture. And how can you kind of establish that? I would say it is important, and for the very highly skilled, in-demand people, it might actually be decisive. So, for instance, there's certain companies out there that have built a culture in a certain way, which is wholly independent of the product or the business line that they're in. They've just decided, you know what, this is the type of culture I want to build. And I would suggest these people become very prominent in people's consciousness when they potentially are looking to work or move on to the next type of business. Classic example, I mean, I don't know this company, but I'll throw it out there because I think it's a reasonable example to use. You look at a company like Buffer, for instance. Where they're very transparent in publishing their accounts. Even if they went down, they've just published that. They published all their conversion metrics. All of this stuff about Buffer. Now, what are they as a business? They're a scheduling tool, right? They just help you schedule tweets. Really, I don't think particularly interesting, but their culture is super interesting, and I think that will probably help them attract a bunch of people that if they didn't think about culture at all, people would ignore it because the product isn't really that cool, but the company is. So I think that's a classic example of what I would call an employer brand that's really emergent from the values rather than designed. And when you have kind of a designed employer brand, that's where you really struggle to do the authenticity piece, because you're trying to build from the roof down. You're saying, these are our values. Okay, team, these are our values. Go and live them. Come on. That literally is old school mission statement. On the wall. Your culture really is emergent from the behaviors that you kind of reward in your business and the behaviors that you punish in the business. Culture simply emerges from that. And then, of course, you can ritualize it and you can brand it a little bit and do all those types of things. But it really comes down to, okay, what do you reward in your company and what do you penalize in the company? And your culture really comes from that. There's no kind of layering on top of something that isn't true.
Super cool answer. And Tim Gale, thank you very much for the question. Super cool. I got loads more. Do you want to pick one, Sam?
Not really, no. Actually, I think we have a few more to ask. I think we're running out of time. But no, okay, let's do one more. To pick one more from the list.
I was going to pick one, actually, I thought Tamara asked, which is quite interesting, which is when you choose new colleagues, Hung, what are the most important skills you will search for?
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah.
That's a really, really tough question. It really is, because I'd like to think that, that I could work with most people. I'd like to think that
you can't give us this answer, Hung. It's got to be the hard skills and quality.
Yeah. I look for personal beauty. Actually, if they're gorgeous, then yeah, I want to work with them. No, I mean, what do you want me to say? I mean, the bottom line is, I think everyone's different. Again, it's context driven, man. It's like, what do I need this person to do with us? You know, one thing that I do value a little bit is someone who is is kind of low maintenance. You know, there's certain people that do have, and this is probably based on context again, because, you know, I don't see myself managing a huge department or a huge team. I want kind of autonomous, self-driving people that can get on with stuff and, you know, really have personal drive. So I'm probably, to answer tomorrow's question there, I would look for someone who doesn't need a lot of additional emotional labor. And that's maybe a personal flaw in me, because I don't have a lot of patience for that. You know, I like to think, again, I'm fairly low maintenance in terms of my friends and relationships and all the rest of it. I respect that quality, because someone who, you know, requires more emotional care, for me, that can be draining, and I can get a little bit annoyed by that if I feel that a lot of time is spent dealing with that emotional labor when in fact we've got stuff to do.
Very fair answer, I think.
Yeah, very fair. I think that was a cool answer, actually. And as you say, context is important. Sam, have you got a couple more questions before we finish up?
Yeah, I do. What was the last song you listened to, Hung?
You know what? I've got Spotify on Discovery and Recommend, so I literally don't know. I just let it wash over me.
Wow.
Yeah, and all my playlists are public, by the way, so you can go and check it out yourself. I don't think they're very good, I've got to be honest, because it's kind of how the recommendation system's gone is that I think it's gone towards some weird country and western deals. Whatever that is, I have no idea. But yeah, I'm letting it happen, man. You know, forget the decision making on this. Just have it wash over you.
Okay. And I guess the last question, unless Tris had any that we had, was what's your secret hobby?
Secret hobby? I keep frogs. I mean, I'm being a bit more public about that now, but yeah, I've got some pet frogs. And I tell you what, the hobby isn't the frogs. The hobby is a technique of maintaining closed ecosystems with, again, low maintenance. So again, it's probably a theme here. Like, I don't want to spend this weird kind of marginal technique in fish keeping, aquariums and stuff like that, which basically tells you, you know what, you don't actually need a filter. You don't need CO2. You don't need any of this. You just need to kind of replicate a natural environment as much as you can. And that involves putting stuff like soil in the bottom of the tank, for instance, which you don't see in a lot of setups because, you know, soil makes a complete mess. But if you do it properly, then actually you get the plants and the soil to do the filtering for you, and you get what's called a low maintenance, low tech tank, where you can just put the animals there, literally do nothing but feed them. And there's the entire nitrogen cycle, life cycle, sort of biochemical processes that sustain life should happen within the tank without artificial kind of interference. So we've got 3 or 4 tanks running like that. Some of them not great. Some of them are. The frog tank is going great. So that right now is my secret guilty pleasure. But
you're the only person I know who could describe keeping frogs as a low maintenance, low tech ecosystem maintenance.
It's all about ecosystem. What can I tell you? All about ecosystem.
I think that's really interesting. You touched on that ecosystem thing because you have built an amazing ecosystem of people around you, Hung. Not just in the early days when you were doing the top 100 recruiters in London list, the DBR, starting DBR has been a huge contribution to the world of recruiting. And even if you're not heavily involved these days, we still see you as our benevolent dictator for life. And we genuinely do really appreciate what you did at the beginning for us in-house recruiters. And then recruiting BrainFood, this is just for me, that's become the recruiting
newsletter, the recruiting newsletter.
But it's not even newsletter, the publication. I've stopped even going to any of the main blogs anymore. I just that's all I look at now is your blog and SourceCon sometimes, and that's it. And my own blog, obviously. But I mean, just quickly, what how do you keep it all up? How do you keep it all going all at the same time?
It's not about how you keep it all going. I'm going to go back to the ecosystem, Tris, because that is genuinely how I feel about things, right? So I do have an ecosystem view, and maybe this comes from my interest in dinosaur extinction, for instance. But you know, it's always, I've always wondered, you know, why did certain species survive the meteorite and certain species didn't? And it just struck me, you know what? Whatever you do in life, in business, you can be one of the dinosaurs, right? You can walk around and be one of the dinosaurs, and everyone's happy as Larry. And then before you know it, some externality happens, and boom, 80% of life is gone. What's smarter for people to do is to understand how the ecosystem itself can survive. And I think I see myself as having a choice of either being a dinosaur on the ecosystem, or as a contributing part of that ecosystem. So as and when a meteor strikes, you know what, the dinosaurs might die off, but the ecosystem's always going to be there. So there's probably a few people listening in to think Hung's actually been smoking something, and what does he really mean? What I really mean is you have to understand that a human being's value is in large part based on the network of relations he or she has and has developed, and that network is one of the most powerful things that you have and that you can contribute to the wider world. And if you can do something to help support that network and help support other people's networks, then ultimately I think good things end up happening. You'll notice a lot of the things that you talked about, Tristan, the top 100 thing or the DBR start off, the BrainFood now, none of those came out from strategic thinking. None of it was, oh, I'm going to do this, it's going to make this, and then it's going to do that. It wasn't that way. It was literally the guiding principle was very, very straightforward. DBR was all about, hey, I think internal recruiters are quite lonely. Let's get them together, right? That was it. BrainFood is, oh, I think recruiters are very busy. The internet's got too big. They can't read all the best stuff. Why don't I make the internet smaller? So you have a guiding mission, and that helps you kind of keep discipline in terms of what you do. And then you realize, you know what, if I just put a bit of good energy here and help other people get a little better, chances are that good energy is going to end up kind of coming back my way in some way. And it does, always. You can't design it, therefore you can't predict it. But there is a kind of a different way of thinking about ROI. And here's how I think about ROI in the network sense, is that it's all about your time frame. When you do ROI, there's a time frame to it, right? Or I'm going to do this campaign, there's like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. That's when you're going to figure out whether it's actually been worth your ROI. Well, in terms of doing things like ecosystem support and building a network value, the ROI is actually your fucking entire life, man. Because whatever you do, you're going to contribute stuff that's out there. And if you're going to help people in this way, they're going to help you in some way. They're going to help each other. The entire world just kind of moves a little bit closer into the right direction. So I think that's as much as anybody can try and do, you know?
Hung, you've made my world a better place. I know you've made lots of people in DBR's world a better place. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much for having a chat. Anything you want to say?
No, I just want to say you two keep doing what you're doing. This is great. Thank you for carrying on the torch. It's been brilliant to see the growth of the DBR channel and all the other stuff you're doing. I'll just say one more thing to the other people who are watching and listening right now. You know, who think about audience, you think, oh, it might be a good thing for me to actually also have and build some sort of community or channel where people might pay some more attention to the stuff that you do. I'd say go ahead and do it, but just remember the best way to do it is to contribute value. Think about what you can do to help somebody out there, and chances are that's actually a really good way to build audience and build a network.
Amen.
Yeah, amen to that. I don't think we have anything else to say. We're back in 2 weeks with Matt Buckland. We're talking about how you can be successful hiring in 2019. We're going to have lots of cool stuff to show you. There's loads of cool things on the DBR channel. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit share, and we'll see you very, very soon. Thanks, Sam.
See you next time.
See you next time.